Hey guys, Metal Jesus here. Now you guys know that I'm on a never-ending quest to convert as many of my retro gaming consoles over to HDMI as possible. Well, a funny thing happened recently. 2 new devices landed in my lap that will help me do that for the Sony PSP. Now the first one is an HDMI cable by a company called LevelHike, and the other one is the brand new MClassic that does a bunch of post-processing. Together, they do some amazing stuff for the PSP when you connect it to your HD television. Let's take a look. All right, let's go ahead and get started. This is my PSP. Now I want to remind people that models 2000, 3000, and Go all support video out. In this video, we're going to primarily focus on the PSP model 2000 and 3000 and not the Go, because the Go actually requires a PSP Go specific cable to get video out. And this is the plug that you see at the bottom here, and it's a mix of audio out as well as video out. And then for years now, fans like me have been using these component cables that you can get right here. Now, Sony makes these as well as third parties. This is actually a Pelican brand. But you'll see that it's component cables, and sometimes that can be kind of a pain to connect to a modern HD television because a lot of companies are starting to phase these out. And that's what's great about LevelHike. When they first reached out to me and said that they're gonna have an HDMI solution for the PSP, I was like, oh, heck yeah, this is exactly what I want. And you'll notice that it looks very similar to a pound cable, and it has the proprietary plug that goes into your PSP, and then it has that little box right there, and that little box requires power, so it does come with a micro USB power. And when you plug it in, the little light will come on, letting you know that it's working. And then on the PSP, you go into settings and you can turn on a connected display. One thing that's kind of unique about this device is that notice how it says menu and game. There's a little switch right there. And that is because it's my understanding that the output of the PSP menu is different than the output of when you're playing a game. And so you use this little switch here to go back and forth. And by the way, this feature here is really cool, and I'll show you why when we get to the gameplay footage. The other thing I wanted to do for this video is add into the mix this MClassic. This is a plug-and-play graphics processor that basically upscales HDMI footage as well as adds a bunch of filters and smoothing to the video quality here. It's designed for modern consoles as well as retro, and so I thought it might be really interesting to check out. And then for this video, I picked a random assortment of PSP games that I thought people might like to see running through this setup. All right, let's take a look. The first game we're going to check out is a first-person shooter by Konami called Coded Arms Contagion. What you're looking at here is the standard PSP component cables. Now, what's really interesting about this is that when you use those PSP component cables, well, the games themselves are still rendered at the original resolution, and that is 480 by 272 resolution. And then what it does is it outputs that at 480p, but it still has the black bars around it here. Now, for years, fans like me have just manually used the zoom on our TV remotes to artificially make that bigger. It kind of sucks, but you know, that's what you had to do. And then here's the same game running through the LevelHike HDMI cables, and those output at 720p. And as you can see, it's filling the screen nicely. You don't have to mess around with your TV remote. It just outputs to 720p, and then your television just handles that. And you're probably noticing that the LevelHike cable is stretching the image slightly. So it is stretching it to 16 by 9, and that is by design. But let's go ahead and dig into that a little bit further. Here is Burnout Legends, a fantastic racing game that I probably talk about all the time. I probably talk about this too much, but this is the original component cables, and of course it is surrounded by the black bars right there. But let's go ahead and artificially zoom that in like you would on your television remote, primarily here so you can see how the stretching is happening. So you can see that even with the original component cables, you would still have potentially bars on the left and right, although fairly small. But with the HDMI cables, they're just stretching that out a bit. And this is a judgment call that I think, you have to decide if you like or not. Me personally, actually, I think that it's close enough that I don't really mind at all. And you'll see that as we go along here that yes, it is stretching it to fill the entire screen, but I think that's just because the PSP has that sort of odd aspect ratio originally when it's coming from the component cables. And here is Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories running through the HDMI cable, and it looks pretty good. Now you can kind of tell that it's a little bit stretched because if you look down on the radar in the left-hand corner, that's not, I guess, technically a perfect circle, but like I said, I still think it's pretty acceptable. And it's funny because I haven't played this game in years, but I remember when it first came out on the PSP, and it was so mind-blowing that a full Grand Theft Auto game was running on a handheld. At the time, it was amazing. Also, I should mention that the audio is also coming through the HDMI cable to your television. Now, I would play a little bit of audio in Grand Theft Auto, but yeah, the radio stations would probably give me a YouTube copyright claim in about 3 seconds flat. It's at this point in the video that I want to introduce the EMCable Classic to the mix here. This is that graphics processor that you can plug in and it will upscale the HDMI footage to 1080p, as well as do some things like post-processing and smoothing and things like that. This is Ratchet & Clank Size Matters, and again, this is running through the LevelHike HDMI cable and then also through that EMCable Classic. And I've slowed the footage down to about 70% of normal speed to try to help show kind of what it's doing. So now this footage is running at 1080p into my Elgato game capture, and I think it looks pretty good. It looks pretty close to a PlayStation 2 game, don't you think? But then here's the same game. However, I've removed that MClassic from the chain. So we're now down to 720p and some of the post-processing smoothing has been removed. And again, I know it's fairly subtle, but trust me, when you play these games with the MClassic, mixed in there with the HDMI, and then you go back, you can definitely tell. Here is SOCOM Fireteam Bravo 2, a fantastic game I absolutely love on the PSP. Now I chose this level because there's a lot of shadow in here, and also because it's snow, there's definitely some contrast going on. And with the HDMI cables, I think, again, it looks pretty good. I do think it's definitely on the dark side as far as the blacks, but, not terrible at all. And then here is the same level, but I've put back in the MClassic and have the smoothing. So now we're outputting to 1080p. And again, I know it's kind of hard to tell the difference on a YouTube video, but the differences are subtle. It's probably adding maybe 10% to the overall quality, the smoothing in it. It's not a huge difference, but I do like it.
Moving, sir. Contacts are moving. Mark 1 for Wraith.
I think this footage might illustrate the differences a little better. So here is Megaman Maverick Hunter X, and we're gonna start off with the smoothing turned on, and then we're gonna transition over to smoothing turned off. So yeah, I think that there's a noticeable difference. And if we zoom in on the character, I think it's very obvious. So on the left, you have smoothing, and on the right, it's just the HDMI cable. Here's one of the mid-level bosses, and you can compare the footage side by side here as well. Now let's go ahead and take a look at Hot Shots Golf. So this is the HDMI cable, and I've also put in front of that the MClassic, so it's doing upscaling to 1080p as well as the smoothing. And then here is the HDMI cable just by itself. Very subtle differences. Again, both of them are great solutions, but together they work really well.
On the green. Go for birdie.
Now let's go ahead and check out Marvel Ultimate Alliance running on the PSP, and this one I expected to see more of a difference, and there really isn't one. So here is the LevelHike HDMI cable, and yeah, it looks great, although be aware that this game, definitely has some frame rate issues that has nothing to do with the cable. It's just that some PSP games actually run maybe under 30 frames a second, so just be aware. And then here's the same game with the MClassic plugged in and the upscaling and smoothing. So can you tell a difference? Not really, in my opinion. It could just be this level and maybe how dark it is, but yeah, I mean, I guess it doesn't hurt. Here is Daxter, and again, this is the HDMI cable, but it also has the MClassic plugged in, so it's upscaling to 1080p, and it has the smoothing turned on. And I feel like Ratchet and Clank, this game and its engine actually benefits quite a bit from that extra little bit of horsepower. And then here is pretty much the same level, same scene, but without the MClassic and smoothing turned on. Again, it looks and plays great, but it's just lacking that little extra amount of polish to make it look like an actual PS2 game. Also, LevelHike let me know that they're looking into an issue where if you use their HDMI cable while your PSP is plugged in and being charged, that you may run into some video issues. Now, honestly, I didn't run into that with mine, so I'm not sure what's going on there, but they wanted me to let you know that they're looking into the issue, and you shouldn't have any problems if you're just running off of your battery. And I do want to mention that switch that is on the top of the HDMI device. What that does is adjust the zoom level depending on where you are on your PSP. So if you are at the main menu, you choose menu, and that basically zooms it out a little bit. And then when you go into the game, you can zoom into game mode, and that basically fills the screen. And that's really nice because the PSP is kind of weird like that. But in all honesty, I just leave it in game mode and it plays fine. So you're probably wondering how much all this costs. Well, the HDMI cables from LevelHike will set you back $40, and then the MClassic is selling for around $100. But keep in mind, you don't have to use the MClassic. I just thought it was actually a nice little seasoning on top of the video signal. And the cool thing about the MClassic is you don't have to use it just for the PSP. You could put it, on the output of your PlayStation 3, your Xbox 360, whatever has HDMI out, it will actually work with, including things like the RetroTink and so much more. So it's very versatile, and you can use it in pretty much most of your game room. And I'm going to put links down in the video description below so you can find out more information about these if you want to check them out. But as you can see, I was pretty excited to get this solution for the PSP. I love collecting for that little handheld. It's so awesome. All right, guys, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and take care.